A tribe called Ghetto Monsters. The Book of Zaza, a tribe called Ghetto. The Order of Awakening. Sibling Axis. The Awakening Dossier Zaza. The Ink and the Abyss. Page 1. The Descent. The tribe stands in a circle, fingers interlaced like locking gears in a factory that hasn't seen the sun in a century. The air in the Caucasus installation is thin, tasting of old iron and oncoming rain. At the center, Rai is a pillar of static, his eyes pulling the light out of the room. Anti-chemist moves with the silence of a spill, scattering the ghetto sand in a perfect, shimmering ring around their boots. The grit hits the floor with a sound like grinding teeth. Nightmares don't live in the bottle. The tribe whispers, a collective rasp that vibrates in the marrow. They live in the dream. The floor doesn't just fall away. It dissolves. Zaza feels the transition not as a drop, but as a saturation. The heat of the siblings, the friction of Seb's fire and Sabi's ticking clock, is snuffed out by a weightless, freezing blue. The sapphire dark isn't an absence of light, it's a presence of mass. She is no longer standing, she is suspended. This is the ritual terrain, a submerged version of the mountain where the peaks are jagged shadows pointing down into the gut of the world. The pressure is the first enemy. It pushes against her ribs, demanding she surrender the air she took for granted. In the water, silence isn't quiet. It's a roar of heartbeats. She is an octopus in a world of hooks, and the water is beginning to write her name in salt. The first shadow moves in the periphery. It isn't a person, it's a system of entrapment. A Caucasian silhouette, rendered in the pale, sickly white of deep-sea bone, drifts toward her. It carries a net woven from legal headers and broken promises. Zaza doesn't breathe, she calculates. Her limbs feel long, fluid, and disconnected from the concept of a skeletal frame. She centers herself in the midnight blue. The nightmare is the box, the cage, the fit she was never meant to occupy. The shadow expands, attempting to dictate her shape. Zaza's response is the first law of the abyss. Nothing holds what can flow. She prepares the ghetto trap, her fingers twitching like tentacles sensing a change in the current. Page 2, the geometry of the drown. The silhouette closes the distance, its movements rigid, governed by the physics of the surface. It tries to apply a skeletal wave lock, an old ghost of Tai Chi renamed for the gutter. Zaza lets her joints go liquid. As the shadow reaches, she employs ghetto hands, not striking but adhering. She steals the joint's intent before the force is even born. Her skin begins to leak. This is the ink, the magic of the ritualized funeral. The sapphire water clouds with a sudden, violent indigo. She isn't just fighting. She is painting a collapse. She throws the ink forward, the pigment turning into barbed wire under the pressure of the deep. It wraps around the shadow's throat, a heavy, silent anchor. You're trying to breathe. Zaza's thought voice cuts through the brine, dripping with the arrogance of the tide. But I am the reason the world started wet. I am the reason it ends in a flood. The shadow struggles, its movements becoming a frantic Ali Chi, desperate and jagged. It tries to find the floor, but Zemlya is miles below, and Zaza owns the midwater. She shifts into a ghetto trap, wrapping multiple inspirations of ink and intent around the shadow's pressure points. She doesn't just want to win, she wants to deconstruct the intruder. The regret surfaces then, unbidden and cold. It's the memory of the fire she tried to steal from her brother, the shame of wanting to burn when she was meant to drown. The ink turns darker, almost black, reflecting her internal rot. She sees herself as the monster, a multi-limbed thing that pulls everything it loves into the crushing dark just so it won't be alone. She watches the shadow's eyes go wide. In the reflection of his fear, she sees her true face, a shifting, faceless storm of sapphire ink. The monster she refuses to name is the consumption. She doesn't just defeat enemies. She absorbs their potential until there is nothing left but white space and salt. A tribe called Ghetto. The Order of Awakening. Sibling Axis. The Awakening Dossier Zaza. The Ink and the Abyss. Page 3, the architecture of the void. The submerged mountain isn't stone. It's a memory of a cage. Zaza moves through the corridors of the Caucasus installation, but the walls are made of frozen sapphire. The light is a dying indigo, flickering like a pulse. She senses the shift, the transition from physical violence to psych warfare. The water carries the scent of her own adrenaline back to her, seasoned with the iron of past failures. She deploys the ghetto trap within the architecture itself. Her ink bleeds into the cracks of the phantom factory, turning the environment into a sensory snare. Every pipe and catwalk becomes an extension of her nervous system. She isn't just in the room, she is the pressure the room exerts. The bad bitch isn't a persona here. It's a survival frequency that vibrates at the depth of the trench. The shadows here take the shape of everyone she ever failed to save. They move with Ali Chi fluidity, circling her in a predator orbit. Zaza doesn't blink. An octopus has 3 hearts. She lets 2 of them freeze so the third can burn cold. She manifests extra limbs from the ink, not for beauty, but for multi-limb pressure. She is a storm in a bottle, and the glass is beginning to crack. She recognizes the tactic, a delayed fear loop. The environment is trying to convince her she is still small, still deformed by the expectations of the surface. Zaza counters by legislating the space. She uses Ghetto feet to anchor herself to the ceiling of the drowned hall, looking down at her fears with the detached hunger of a deep-sea hunter. One shadow steps forward, wearing the face of a younger, uninked Zaza. It holds a mirror made of sapphire. The reflection is blank. This is the fear of being unseen, the dread that beneath the ink and the combat there is no soul, only a void. Zaza feels the water get heavier, the weight of the Caucasus Mountains pressing down on her lungs. She strikes the mirror with a Ghetto hand strike. Bone-on-bone brutality delivered through a liquid medium. The glass shatters into indigo shards. I am not the reflection. She snarls into the brine, her voice a series of bubbles that turn into lead. I am the hand that breaks the glass. Page 4. The predator orbit. The shards of the mirror don't fall. They hover, turning into a swarm of sapphire bees. Zaza shifts her weight, utilizing backward-style predator orbits renamed for the Ghetto. She moves in spirals that defy the gravity of the nightmare. Each rotation gathers the ink around her, creating a defensive shroud that eats the light. She is the midnight blue that precedes the end of time. The swarm attacks. Zaza responds with Vietnamese guerrilla floor traps adapted for 3 dimensions. She leaves ink ambush clouds in her wake, toxic pockets of concentrated regret that blind the swarm. As the bees enter the clouds, they freeze, paralyzed by the psychological weight of Zaza's suppressed shame. She watches them drift away, useless husks of memory. A new figure emerges from the dark, the system. It is a massive white-masked entity, representing the Caucasians of the world obstacles that demand she justify her existence. It doesn't fight with hands, it fights with rules. It projects a grid of sapphire lasers, a mental confinement designed to box her in. This is Sabi's nightmare, but is hunting her now. Zaza realizes she cannot outthink the grid. She must outflow it. She uses Ghetto Chi to soften her molecular structure. She doesn't dodge the lasers. She lets them pass through her like light through water. She is becoming the very element the Fire Brothers fear. Water is the beginning. Water is the end. She is the flood that the grid was never built to contain. The system falters. Its logic cannot compute a target that refuses to hold a shape. Zaza closes the distance using Ali Chi bursts. Short, violent movements that close the gap before the enemy can reset the rhythm. She enters the bone-on-bone range, her knees acting as terrain enforcement, driving into the system's core with the weight of a falling ocean. You're a map, she whispers, her ink limbs wrapping around the entity's throat. I am the territory. She exerts a quiet death. No piece finish, collapsing the entity's structural integrity until it is nothing but a stain of sapphire on the floor of the dream. The aftermath is a heavy, rhythmic silence. Page 5. The ritual of the ink. The factory walls begin to melt into the shape of a funeral pyre, but the fire is cold. This is the anti-chemist influence, symbolic contamination. The water is turning into a ritualized chemical bath. Zaza feels her ink reacting to the change, the sigils on her skin beginning to glow with the sapphire heat. She is being rewritten in real time. She faces her shadow of regret. It is the memory of every time she stayed silent when she should have roared. The regret takes the form of a heavy, indigo anchor chain to her neck. It pulls her toward the bottom of the Caucasus Trench, toward the failure she fears most. The deeper she goes, the more her identity erodes. Zaza stops fighting the descent. She yields to the fear, Ghetto Chi yielding, and uses the momentum of the fall to accelerate. If she is going to hit the bottom, she will hit it like a meteor. As she nears the floor of the nightmare, she shapes her ink into a massive, multi-pointed star. The Fire Star 72, rendered in freezing sapphire. The impact doesn't break her, it breaks the floor. The bottom of her fear is revealed to be a false ceiling. Beneath it lies the true abyss, the infinite potential of the water. She sheds the anchor, the chain dissolving into indigo dust. She realizes that her deformity was just a shape the surface couldn't name. In the deep, she is perfect. She begins the ritual combat of the self. She uses her own ink to draw new sigils in the water, laws of her own making. I will be seen. I will not be boxed. I will be the storm. Every sentence she speaks creates a physical truth in the water. The sapphire dark begins to swirl, forming a vortex that she commands with a simple flick of her wrist. The nightmare tries to regroup, throwing a final wave of unseen horrors at her. Faceless entities that represent the void, Zaza greets them with a smile that has too many teeth. She is no longer the victim of the dream. She is the architect of the drowning. She deploys a ghetto trap that spans the entire horizon of her mind. Page 6. The Sapphire Sovereignty. The faceless horrors are pulled into the vortex. Zaza moves through the chaos with the fluid dislocation of a master. She doesn't strike, she erases. Every movement is a precision delivery system of pure intent. She uses Ali Chi to redirect the nightmare's own pressure back onto itself, turning the fear of being unseen into a weapon of total invisibility. She is now the shadow. She moves behind the nightmare's remaining structures, dismantling them with Muay Thai-inspired clinch brutality. She breaks the joints of the factory, the pipes of the system, and the bones of the past. There is no waste. Every movement is a strategic manifestation of her narrative power. The environment begins to stabilize. The midnight blue turns into a calm, sapphire mirror. Zaza stands at the center of the stillness, her ink limbs retracted, her skin a map of won battles. She has confronted the monster she refused to name, the part of her that feared her own power. She looks into the water and finally sees a reflection. It is Zaza, but refined. The ink on her skin isn't a mask, it's an archive. She is the bad bitch of the deep, a bad bitch who stays a bad bitch because she has survived the crushing weight of her own history. She realizes that the Caucasus Mountains were never the enemy, they were the whetstone for her blade. She feels Rai's pull from the surface. The ritual is ending. The sapphire dark begins to thin, the indigo light fading back into the gray of the Caucasus morning. Zaza takes one last breath of the heavy water, storing the pressure in her marrow. She will bring the abyss back with her to the waking world. The water is at the beginning, she whispers, her voice finally clear. And I am the end. The circle of the tribe begins to reappear. The sand is still settling on the floor. The dream is over, but the awakening has just begun. Page 7. The Awakening Echo. The transition back to the physical plane is a violent decompression. Zaza's lungs burn as they trade the sapphire brine for the thin mountain air. She is back in the circle, her hands still locked with the tribe. The heat of the room feels alien now, a superficial friction compared to the profound pressure of the deep. Rai is watching her, his eyes acknowledging the change. Auntie Kim steps forward, her eyes scanning Zaza's skin. The ink looks different, darker, more vibrant, as if it has been fed. The ghetto sand at Zaza's feet has turned a faint indigo. The ritual has left its mark. Zaza doesn't speak. She doesn't need to. Her presence has expanded to fill the room, a quiet, sapphire authority. The tribe remains silent. The nightmares don't live in the bottle chant still vibrating in the air. Each of them is returning from their own hell. But Zaza is the only one who looks like she brought a piece of hers back. She looks at Seb, his fire star energy flickering. She doesn't envy the heat anymore. She knows the cold is what holds the world together. She tests her movement, a simple rotation of the wrist. It's Ali Chi, but it carries the weight of the trench. The environment of the warehouse feels fragile to her now, like a cardboard set that she could collapse with a thought. She has legislated her internal space, and the external world is starting to follow suit. The dossier note for this session is cold. Subject Zaza has achieved primary saturation. The fear of invisibility has been replaced by the mastery of the void. Internal monsters have been harnessed as kinetic potential. The sibling axis is now weighted toward the deep. Zaza catches her reflection in a piece of industrial scrap. She sees the monster. She likes it. Ready for tomorrow? Rai asks. Zaza looks at the midnight blue of the shadows stretching across the factory floor. She thinks of the sapphire stars she found at the bottom of the nightmare. She thinks of the fashion for tomorrow, the ink, the silk, and the silent, crushing power. I've been ready since the beginning of time, she says. A tribe called Ghetto. The Order of Awakening. Sibling Axis. The Awakening Dossier Zaza. The Ink and the Abyss. Page 8. The Weight of Sapphire. The warehouse floor is no longer concrete. It is a membrane. Zaza feels the transition into the 8th page of the ritual as a thickening of the air. The midnight blue hasn't left her, it has become her skin. She moves toward the center of the industrial space, her movements governed by ghetto feet, sticking to the reality of the moment while her mind remains submerged. Every step leaves a faint, sapphire ghost of a footprint, a residue of the dream ink. She encounters the first physical manifestation of the nightmare's residue, a system code entity standing near the loading docks. It is a tall, featureless construct of white light, an obstacle designed to test her new sovereignty. Zaza doesn't use the fire of her brothers to engage. She uses the life force energy of water. She approaches with a fluid dislocation, her shoulders rolling like waves before a storm, refusing to give the entity a solid target to track. The construct strikes with a linear precision, a mechanical ghost of a jab. Zaza employs ghetto trap logic, catching the strike not with her hands, but with the hollow space created by her movement. She redirects the force into a circle, a ghetto cheese spiral that pulls the entity off balance. She is an octopus, and the entity is a hook that has found no meat. She feels the bad bitch energy rising, a cold, sapphire fire that demands total submission from the environment. She speaks, and her voice carries the echo of the Caucasus deep. You are trying to measure what cannot be mapped. She executes a Muay Thai bone-on-bone clinch, her knees driving into the construct's midsection with the weight of 1,000 fathoms. The white light flickers, turning a bruised indigo. In the space now, turning the warehouse into her own ritual combat arena where the rules of the surface no longer apply. The regret she faced in the dream, the fear of being deformed or unseen now manifests as a tactical advantage. Because she no longer cares if she is seen, she becomes impossible to hit. She moves into the blind spots of the entity's perception, a psych warfare maneuver that erases her presence from its sensory grid. She is the shadow in the sapphire, the nightmare that moves between the heartbeats of the system. She finishes the encounter with a quiet death. No peace maneuver. She doesn't strike the final blow. She simply removes the space the entity needs to exist. She wraps her infused intent around the construct until it implodes, leaving nothing but a sapphire stain on the reality of the room. The aftermath is a silent white space. Zaza stands alone, the midnight blue of her fashion for tomorrow already beginning to manifest in the way she holds her frame. Page 9, The Funeral of Fear. The ninth page opens with a shift in the atmosphere, the scent of anti-chemist's ritual chemistry. The warehouse air turns into a thick, blue vapor. This is the ritualized precision phase. Zaza sees her siblings in the periphery, faint sapphire outlines struggling with their own monsters, but she is the anchor. She begins the funeral of fear, a movement set designed to bury her suppressed regrets once and for all. She shapes her ink into a literal weapon, a sapphire blade that looks like a frozen shard of the abyss. She isn't fighting an external enemy now. She is fighting the lingering shame of her own power. She carves a sigil into the air, a ghetto trap for her own doubt. The ink hangs in the vapor, a glowing sapphire fire, star 72. It is the most beautiful and destructive thing in the room. Fire is my brother's thing, she whispers, her eyes locking onto the glowing star. But I am the water that decides when the fire dies. She moves through a series of LHP forms, her body becoming a conduit for the energy of the beginning of time. She is no longer Zaza the girl. She is Zaza the force. The deformity she once feared is now her greatest strength. The ability to be many things at once, to strike from angles that don't exist. The environment responds to her sovereignty. The pipes in the warehouse begin to sweat indigo. The machinery hums in a sapphire frequency. She is the conductor of the drowning. She uses Ghetto hands to ripple the air itself, sending shockwaves of pressure toward the corners of the room where the last shadows of the Caucasus nightmare hide. They dissolve before she even reaches them. She confronts the final refusal to name. The monster inside her, the one that wants to consume everything, steps out of the vapor. It looks exactly like her, but its eyes are sapphire voids. Zaza doesn't recoil. She embraces the monster. She pulls it into her skin, a ritual containment move that fuses her shadow with her light. The result is a total integration of style and intent. The weight of the page 9 is the weight of a queen taking her throne. She stands in the center of the indigo vapor, her skin shimmering with the sapphire ink of 1,001 battles. She has turned her regret into a resource. She has turned her shame into a shield. She is the bad bitch that the dream was afraid of. The page ends with a slow, rhythmic drip of indigo water from the ceiling. Page 10, The Awakening Dossier finalized. The final page is the collapse of the dream into the truth. The Caucasus Mountains are no longer a recurring terrain. They are a conquered memory. Zaza stands at the head of the circle, the midnight blue and sapphire of her aura illuminating the faces of her siblings. The order of awakening is complete for the sibling axis. She is the fluid dislocation that holds the tribe together. She looks at Rai, the conductor. He nods, acknowledging the fire stars she has claimed. 80 stars of narrative power, rendered in the sapphire of the deep. She has not wasted her potential. Every sentence of her story has been a physical truth, a strategic deployment of Ghetto style. She is the ink ambush that the world never saw coming. The final paragraph of the dossier is a cold observation. Subject Zaza, the beautiful mind of the deep. Mastery achieved through the integration of the consumption. The water has risen, and the fire has been put out. She moves her hands in a final Ghetto chi closure, sealing the energy of the ritual into her marrow. She is ready for the fashion of tomorrow, a fashion of sapphire armor and indigo strikes. The warehouse is silent. The Ghetto sand has been swept away by the invisible tide Zaza brought back with her. She looks at her hands. They are steady, stained with the ink of a god. The Caucasus installation feels small now, a dollhouse for children. She has found the end of time in the present moment, and it is both beautiful and destructive. I am an octopus, she says to the silence, a playful, competitive edge in her voice, and I don't live in the fire. I am the one who drowns it. She turns toward the exit, her movement a masterclass in alley chi efficiency. The tribe follows her lead, the shadows of the Caucasus finally retreating before the sapphire light of the awakening. The awakening dossier is finalized. The tribe called Ghetto Monsters is no longer a dream. They are the hardware expressing tribal traditions outwardly. Zaza leads the charge into the waking world, the midnight blue of her intent trailing behind her like a royal cape. The story is written, and the water is still rising.
That is the Book of Zaza. We have one more contestant coming up, and that's going to be the Book of Bola. You have to understand that today's fashion is because she and two of her other brothers won because they all simultaneously really had different stories, but they had amazing writing skills. So, because she was the winner last night, I asked her what did she want to wear, and what we see right here is her fashions that she described in the story. So, I'm about to drop down so we can bring Bola up because Bola is ready to talk his shit. And, you know, I appreciate everybody who has come and dropped in and dropped out, and those of you who have stayed. You are witnessing the Ghetto Tribe, and the Ghetto Tribe is here to say that the ghetto ain't going nowhere. We're just rising up.